So welcome to Read Along with Chautona. I feel like I'm Mitch Miller in the gang, but it's Read Along. It's kind of strange, but it's fun too. This time we're going to do something really fun. This is a book that doesn't come out till January. It's Bookers on the Rocks. It's my second book in the Independence Islands series itself, my third in the Independence Islands world. And bookers, these are all supposed to be contemporary romance, and this book refused to obey. So instead we have contemporary romantic women's fiction. I did my best, but it refused to obey. So instead we have this, and I hope you'll forgive me. But here's chapter 1 of Bookers on the Rocks. This book is, all of mine in this, I'm doing twists on romantic tropes. And in this one, we have a marriage on the rocks. Nobody's having an affair. They don't argue. They're very happy together. And yet their marriage is on the rocks. Bookers on the Rocks, Chapter 1, January 8th. The line at Comfort Cuisine finally thinned enough that Benjamin Hornigold could hear the day's special as Beth took an order ahead of him. Barbecue pork bomb? Oh yeah, he'd take that. Almost his favorite. Oh, yep, and chocolate chip cookies to die for. Beth didn't say that, of course, but Benjamin knew. Forget that, everyone on the islands knew. Rumor had it the bakers of the islands had given up bothering to make chocolate chip cookies anymore. It might be an exaggeration, but it wasn't much of one. Cold air whipped around him as the trees waved to passing gulls that didn't have enough sense to stay out of the air. A glance at his phone showed a big 5-4. Not going to make it to 60 today. Glad I don't have to be out on the water. Some thought him silly, staying on shore on days like this, but his father had always said, "You don't risk your equipment just because someone else does." Dad had been right, of course. How often did the Coast Guard have to try to help a stranded fishing crew because they'd try to get a leg up? With his little operation, he couldn't afford that. Benjamin, earth to Benjamin. His head snapped up. Oh, Beth, thanks. 2 specials. That girl's eyes could see right through him. He knew it. Taking one to Mallory? Just extra hungry. He said it because she expected it, but they both knew it was code for, yeah, duh. The torment, that is waiting, began. Scents of pulled pork and barbecue sauce, and who knew what else she put in those bombs. Slaw. There was slaw wrapped in those tortillas, wasn't there? It all sent curls and swirls of mouth-watering aromas designed to hook passers-by and reel them in. Don't have to reel me in. I'm ready and waiting. Beth called his name. I added extra napkins. Can't let my favorite Hornigold get sauce on Mallory's books. No risk of that. Instead of opening that worm can, Benjamin laughed at her joke and said, if it wasn't for my cousin, you'd still think the Hornigolds were sketchy. Our multi-great-grandfathers and all. Pirate rivalry and who knows what. I've got a book about it. Mallory found it for me. Want to read it when I'm done? Benjamin took a step back. I'll think about it. Let me know what you think. Mallory had the book barrel doors closed, but the open sign hung and swayed in the wind. With hands full, he gave the door a gentle knock and grinned at her when she opened. Hungry? In less than a second, she jerked him up the steps and into the shop. Or so it seemed. You are my lifesaver. I'm usually a life killer. A fish, that is. Very funny. Oh, that smells good. I'll take it with me. Take? He eyed her. What are you talking about? She dug her wrapped pork bomb from the bag, grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge, jerked her purse out from under a counter, and reached for the doorknob. I have to run to Breakers. Be back as soon as possible. If you have to leave, can you lock up? She paused only for a minute. Please say you won't have to leave. This is the worst eat and run ever, but seriously, emergency here. He couldn't let her go. Why don't you just stay here and I'll go get whatever you need? That stopped her. I am so tempted to take you up on that just to see the look on your face. I really don't. Oh. Benjamin managed to suppress a shudder. If you really want to stay, I can. Seriously, you just went to best friend status right there. Honestly, she gave him a quick hug. But I wouldn't ask that of any guy if I could prevent it. Be back as soon as possible. It took all he had in him to call out after her, I'll be here. Sure hope no one wants something I don't know how to make. But they would, and he'd have to call, and she'd have to walk him step by step on how to take water, beans, sugar, and lactose and turn them into something worth drinking. Meanwhile, he sat down in the small chair she kept for herself and unwrapped his pork bum. Just might have to eat one of her cookies, too. Guilt kicked that idea to the curb. What jerk would tell a woman dealing with her girly stuff that she couldn't have all the chocolate she wanted? As soon as he'd eaten, Benjamin opened all the doors and windows to prevent the tiny house-turned bookstore from smelling more like Beth's and less like books. Book people were funny about that. They liked the smell of paper and ink. He'd just gotten it closed back up and the heater on when the door opened and in stepped Tess Booker. Hey, Ms. Booker, how's Mr. Booker doing? Fine, just fine. He still talks about taking the boys out with you if you're still up to that, maybe during spring break. As she spoke, she began pulling books off the shelves, reading the backs and sliding them back in again. 2 she kept in hand, but eventually she put one of those back too. After a second look at the front and the back, she handed it to him. Benjamin went for the iPad checkout system Mallory had for the shop. You want this one? Card? Mrs. Booker hesitated. What do you think? That cover says romance, but the synopsis doesn't even really hint at it. Think it's a romance or not? Without even looking at the back, Benjamin shrugged. People always complain that the cover doesn't match the story, but I don't hear them saying that about the synopsis. He shrugged again, hoping this would be the end of what's this book about? Interrogation. But does it sound romantic to you? There wasn't anything to do but at least give the back a cursory glance. What's romantic in this? She grinned. Good. If you don't see it either, then we'll assume the cover's wrong. Dread broke him out in a hard sweat. Or maybe he'd just overcooked the store. Benjamin reached for the thermostat, turned it down, and accepted the book and her card. He copied the title down on the clipboard Mallory kept of sales and swiped the card. But as he did, he also tried to convince the woman she should just get the book next week, or even an hour or so when Mallory got back. I wouldn't want to steer you wrong, and I'm convinced she's read everything in this place. Mrs. Booker insisted she wouldn't hold him responsible. I just need to get home and put my feet up. It's been a long morning. Bible study was interesting. With the sale charged and the book wrapped as Mallory liked to wrap them, or at least his best shot at it anyway, Mrs. Booker said goodbye and Benjamin sank back into the chair again. Relief mingled with a bit of envy. Happy customers were so important to Mallory. If he'd recommended a book she didn't like, but man, Bible study. He dreamed of being able to go to those, but his situation didn't allow for it. I'll be content, Lord, but... By the time Mallory breezed in, Benjamin was ready to close up and go check on her. Sorry, any customers? She laughed, as if on Elnora on a Wednesday as cold as this. Ignore me. You had one, Mrs. Booker. She bought a book. Which one? He shrugged. I wrote it down, but... Oh. Mallory snatched up the clipboard, read it, and groaned. Oh, grapes of wrath. She's not going to be happy. What? We went back and forth on it. Romantic cover, not a romantic synopsis. Decided to trust the synopsis. Mallory pounced on the cookies he'd left beside the register. Oh, yes, Benjamin, you're the best. That earned him another hug. 2 in one day. Impressive. She waved the clipboard at him. Unfortunately, Minuet in Gigi is definitely romantic. The whole second half is a romance. Uh-oh. She eyed him. You should read it. Even with the romance, it's a pretty good story, and it has a fisherman as the male protagonist. Uh-oh. She eyed him. I said that. We'll skip that again. Sometimes my heart gets all wonky when you use words like protagonist and denouement. He'd never admit that, so Benjamin just shrugged. Don't have much time for reading, but maybe someday. I'll make a book lover of you yet. Second section. Minuet and Gigi held Tessa captivated. Despite the cover with its separated couple, and the longing displayed there, it had turned out to be a time-split novel where a contemporary woman, abandoned by her husband for a younger, more adventuresome young thing, had taken her divorce settlement, what of it there was, and had moved to a small little seaside village in Cornwall. In fact, the descriptions were so familiar that Tessa suspected the author had been inspired by that British TV show, Doc Martin, when she designed her own seaside village. It's got to be modeled after Port Wen, which was modeled after Port Isaac. The random trivia attempted to drag her attention from the story, but Tessa was determined not to be drawn out of her afternoon rest. Besides, Gigi had just discovered a delicate key hidden in a secret drawer of a desk. She must know what the key went to. A trill from her phone signaled time to get supper started. Tessa finished the chapter, peeked at the first line of the next, and reached for the receipt Benjamin had given her. With it tucked into the pages, she hauled herself from the couch and went to ensure supper was ready when Ross walked in the door. The potatoes that had been boiling for the last half hour needed to be drained and mashed. Tessa worked on autopilot. Cream cheese, garlic juice from the minced garlic, onion powder, salt, pepper, butter, milk, whipped, and done. The leftover roast from Sunday she chopped into fine pieces, mixed with peas, carrots, celery, and corn, made a gravy, and Tessa sprinkled shredded cheese over the top of the thing, set it in the oven, and set the timer for half an hour. A glance at the clock. Yep, perfect timing. 30 minutes should get her through another couple of chapters, at the least. This salad in a jar thing is saving me frustration every day. The next chapter sent her back in time. Back to the time of Georgette Heyer's damsels with their elegant balls and the peerage determining who, if anyone, mattered. Tessa had expected the key to belong to a young lady, perhaps one who didn't want to be some old codger's wife and had hidden away a fortune so she could escape a life that rivaled Mr. Rochester's first wife's. Instead, it was a beloved second son. He received the key from his mother on her deathbed with promises that it would provide him with all he needed for his future. Tessa glanced at the small clock on the end table as she turned the page. Still had 15 minutes. 3 pages in, she snapped the book shut and squeezed her eyes tight. No. The romance would be there. Though the first almost full half of the book, there had been not even the slightest inkling, but now, no doubt, it was coming. That fisherman and his soulful eyes, he'd woo her with all the fumbling, bumbling attempts to share his heart. She'd resist and then accept. Yet another ridiculous, happily ever after pile of... There, Tessa smiled and assumed her best mental English accent. Rubbish. For 10 minutes she brooded, glaring at the book as if somehow it would intimidate the words into rearranging themselves and breaking off the budding relationship. Twice she opened it again, determined to wade through the nightmare so she could get a water taxi over to Sparrow Island the next day and get rid of the thing. Her phone trilled again. Time to take out the cottage pie. As if he'd heard it too, Tessa heard Ross pull into the drive and shut off his Durango. With each step to the kitchen, the book still in hand, Tessa's ire increased. She slammed it down on the counter and jerked open the oven. Only the blast of heat in her face stopped her from reaching for the handles of the small casserole dish without potholders. Ross stepped in just as she pulled back. "Potholders, Tessa?" Part of her protested, "I know," like a small toddler, but she just turned to accept his kiss and forced a smile. Almost forgot. "Good thing I came in when I did then." "You think that if you like." She winced. She hadn't meant the thought to be smarky, but it sure felt like it. "Thank you." Ross watched her for a moment and nodded. You'd already figured it out. "Doesn't mean I'm not thankful for you watching out for me. Dinner's in 15. I'll just go change." Strange how they spent every night saying the exact things they said almost every other night of their 25-year marriage. Once in a while, she considered not stating the obvious just to see if he'd notice. But even the delay felt off somehow. His arms slid around her waist, his jaw pressed against her temple the moment she set the pie on the burners to cool. "Are you okay?" "You noticed?" Of course you did. And it was one of more reasons than she'd ever been able to count why she loved him. Yes, or will be. Bad book. He wouldn't say it, wouldn't ask why she wouldn't just toss it. Instead, he did exactly what she thought he would. He kissed her temple and promised to clean up after dinner so she could finish it and get it out of the way. The routine was already broken, so Tessa allowed herself the luxury of sagging against him and sighing. It started out so good. Sometimes I think you should rewrite all the books that start off well and then go all mushy on you. His teasing usually would have made her laugh at herself, but Tessa wasn't in the mood. Maybe I should. After turning to gaze at her, "Really look," he nodded and turned to go. "Be right down. Can't keep the book waiting." Chapter 1, Bookers on the Rocks. Looking forward to sharing the rest of it with you.